Good morning, everyone. Welcome to this BOHS webinar on isocyanates. I'm going to start things off by having a look at the recommended method for sampling for isocyanates, looking at the main drawbacks that we get when using it. I'll also be talking about how the GAL fits in with this procedure and look at some of the most recent changes that we've made to the SOP that you need to follow to ensure we're complying with a license. So first of all, anybody that is using a formulation that contains a significant amount of isocyanates, they will find that it comes labelled with the H334 risk phrase, may cause allergy or asthma symptoms or breathing difficulties if inhaled. If you're a company that uses the COSH Essentials hazard banding approach to COSH, what you'll normally do is you'll use these H phrases to assign the substance you're looking at into one of 5 hazard groups. There'll be Group A to Group E, where Group A is the least hazardous. Group A is the least hazardous and Group E is the most hazardous. When you come across isocyanates with H334, these fall into Group E, which is bad news if you're using COSH Essentials, because for Group E substances, you cannot use that approach and you need to engage a specialist to help you with the assessment. So hence, people using COSH Essentials will be put down the route of using a specialist like ourselves as occupational hygienists. So what will we do when we go into that situation? We'll do what occupational hygienists always do. We will look at the control measures that are in use. We'll check that they're complying with the hierarchy of controls. And at some stage, we'll want to look at the residual health risks. So at that point, we will identify the SEGs, the similarly exposed groups, and look at methods for determining personal exposures. We've already seen H334 relates to exposure by inhalation, so the most obvious thing that we need to do is measure exposure by inhalation. This is where the difficulty starts to kick in, because for most of the substances that have got WELs, we're looking at either unique chemical substances or where there are groups, they're very similarly related. But isocyanates are a bit different to that. The isocyanate group can be linked to an aromatic ring, and so they're aromatic in nature. They could be linked to hydrocarbons, which can be straight chain or cyclic. We're normally talking about diisocyanate, so we can be looking at either monomers, oligomers, or higher molecular weight polymers. And these substances can be there in a variety of different forms. We could be talking about isocyanates as vapors, or they could be present in the form of an aerosol, or both. All forms of isocyanate are hazardous. So if we're going to estimate the quantity of isocyanate, we need a method that is going to detect it no matter what the chemical type and no matter what physical form. And this presents quite a unique challenge for both the hygienist and the analyst. At the present moment in time, there is only one method that's recommended that will measure the total reactive isocyanate group. If we're going to be able to compare the data that we generate to the workplace exposure limit, we need to be monitoring TRIG. That recommended method is MDHS 25.4, and it's the only method that allows us to compare directly to the limit. There are other methods out there that do allow you to measure isocyanate levels, but none of these look at isocyanates in all the various forms you could encounter. That doesn't mean to say that these methods aren't worth using, but you need to be sure that the isocyanates that you're going to expose workers to, that you're looking at, are ones that are detected by that method and no others. NDHS25-4, the key ingredient is this substance here, 1,2-methoxyphenylpiperazine, which we all refer to as 1,2-MP. This is the key ingredient that allows us to measure to trig. What happens is the isocyanate reacts with the secondary amine part of this molecule, and that will prevent it reacting further. So when we expose substances to 1,2-MP, it's stabilised so it doesn't react any further, and the urea derivative that's formed can be analysed in the lab, and we get a measure of the isocyanate that was originally present. The difficulty here, or one of the difficulties, is that 1,2-MP is restricted under the misuse of drugs legislation. So those that supply or use 1,2-MP must work on a home authority licence or have Crown immunity, such as HSE. We have the BOHS Group Authority licence that allows members of an appropriate grade to use 1,2-MP for sampling. This licence relates to possession. It does not extend to supply. So we cannot use that group authority licence to supply to a third party, and we cannot allow members of a third party to be engaged in the air sampling. Our licence does not extend to that. To make life easier, we've taken all of the conditions within our home authority licence and embodied them into the SOP. Because failure to comply with these licences could mean that the licence is revoked, it's absolutely essential that the conditions of the SOP are followed at all times. The latest version of the SOP, version 6, dated March 2025, is available on the BOHS website. So which grades of membership can work under the GAL? That will include the Chartered Fellow, the Chartered Member, Licentiate and Associate grades. Ordinary members and others can assist in surveys, but they have to work under the direct and personal supervision of the member leading the on-site work. One of the most recent changes to the SOP, we stipulate that those that order the sampling media and lead the on-site surveys must work for the same company. This ensures that we can't be accused of infringing the supply by using people from outside the company doing the ordering. So how does the GAL fit in with 25.4? The SOP is there purely to comply with the requirements of the Home Office licence. Nothing in the SOP is there to ensure that we're generating valid data. Similarly, 25.4 looks at how to generate the valid data, but doesn't do anything in relation to the maintaining a secure chain of custody throughout. So the two fit hand in hand, but serve quite different purposes. Those laboratories that are licensed to supply 1,2-MP, we have the HSE Science Division, RPS Laboratories and IOM. These laboratories will share data with BOHS to allow us to verify audit returns. So the laboratories will liaise with us they will allow us to see who has ordered the sampling media, when it was returned and how much has been returned. Those ordering the sampling media or leading the on-site survey must have passed the GAL assessment within the last 3 years. The GAL assessment is the online question system that allows us to check that those ordering the sampling media understand the basic requirements of the SOP. If you attempt to order media without having had a GAL assessment within the last 3 years, the laboratory would refuse to supply you with those sampling media as they will check with a membership department prior to issuing the media through the post to you. The member leading the on-site work is the one that's responsible for maintaining the secure chain of custody while on site. When we do the end-of-year audit, we require two forms now. We have the local standard operating procedure. This is where we require you to give us sufficient information to prove to us that you are maintaining a secure chain of custody from when you receive it from the lab through to when you return it to the lab. We also require the individual work record sheets, which gives us detail of each and every survey that those selected for audit have made throughout the year. We no longer require the audit record cover sheet and the exception records. What we've done is we've looked to try and simplify the paperwork and keep it as simple as possible, but still allow us to do the job. In terms of exception records, what we consider is that the one exception where we really need to investigate what's happened is where the amount of sampling media that you've ordered does not equate to that return to the laboratory for either destruction or analysis. If you have any instances where that doesn't happen, something will appear to have gone amiss, and we require members that are faced with that situation to report to the responsible officer, that's myself, within 10 working days from the date at which the issues become known. So tell us, why did that happen? How did that come about? And if necessary, what have you done to make certain it doesn't happen again? So this is the key change. This requirement to report this replaces the exception records. So what are the practical difficulties of using MDHS 25.4? Well, the first thing to be aware of is that the impregnated filters, they have a shelf life of 6 months, but the solutions only have a shelf life of 1 week. When we talk about the impregnated filters, this is where we can put that impregnated filter into a sampling head, such as an IOM head, and you can use an impregnated filter to monitor actually within the breathing zone of the worker. If you're only exposing workers to vapors, this makes life straightforward. Vapors can be analysed using the impregnated filter, and we can take personal samples. This means that when we get the data, we can use whatever statistical method we care to use. We can do analysis of the data and check that the limit isn't exceeded using BSE 8689 or using one of the statistical tools to ensure we're getting compliance with the well. Or better still, we're getting compliance with a health base limit. So this is the hygienist working within their comfort zone. This is the sort of thing that we will do for each and every survey. And that's the situation where we're exposing people only to isocyanate vapors. But what if there are aerosols also present? Impregnated filters are not suitable for the measurement of isocyanate in the form of aerosols. If there are aerosols present as well, then we need to use an impinger contained in the solution backed up by the impregnated filter. So we need these two components if we're going to measure trig where there are aerosols present. So what's the practical difficulty of doing this? Well, the impinger may need topping up with toluene because that evaporates as you're passing it through the bubbler in the impinger. This is no big deal. It's a bit inconvenient, but hey, you keep your eye on it and you top up with toluene as necessary. The other disadvantage is the impinger method is not suitable for personal monitoring. Now, this is a big deal. This is one that really causes us difficulties. If you have a look at Appendix 2 of 25.4, Appendix 2 does offer what appears to be a possible option for doing personal monitoring with isocyanates in the form of aerosols. Appendix 2 said that you can use a double loading of 1,2-MP in a sampling head. But there's another issue here. There's a big but associated with this. Appendix 2 says, would point out that this is only appropriate under certain circumstances, and it's still not suitable if you've got long-term sampling, where there might be a heavy load-in, or where there are fast reaction mixtures. So what we've got here is that this is throwing a little bit of a spanner into the works. It's putting some doubt in the system as whether this Appendix 2 is suitable in your particular case. So how can you check to see whether you're getting undersampling or underestimates of sampling in your particular case? What you can do is you can set up a static sampling train. So what you can have is in this sampling train in the static location, you can have one sample where you're using the impregnated filter only, and you can use a second sampling train where you've got the impinger plus the impregnated filter. So the impregnated filter only is giving you the value that you would be as if you were using a personal sampler, and using a combination that the total isocyanate in the other sampling train allows you to compare that to that value to see how much you're undersampling by. So what we have there is if you've got pairs of static samples and you've got them in various locations, you can use this ratio to calculate what you might consider to be a correction factor that you apply to the personal sample to compensate for any undersampling. But here we come across another difficulty, because these correction factors can be very variable. And we can only really consider the results from this method to be an estimate of what is actually being inhaled by the worker. But this is not a cheap method of obtaining an estimate, because you need to be doing more than one static sampling train, because we know they can be variable. And for each static, you will be obtaining at least 2 samples for analysis. And then there will be a further sample that needs to be analysed from the personal sample that you take from the worker. So we're actually taking a lot of samples to get what is at best considered to be an estimate of exposure. Not being able to accurately measure personal exposures during work with aerosols is a major issue. Is there another option? Well, the answer is for the most commonly used isocyanates, there is another option, because we have a biological monitoring guidance value published in EH40. What we can do, we can look for the metabolites of the isocyanates, the analogous amines, for using in post-shift urine samples. This is not considered to be equivalent to doing a personal air monitoring. It is not considered to be equivalent to that, because when we're doing biological monitoring, we are measuring the total body burden by all routes of exposure. We could consider this to be an advantage if the results from the biological monitoring are comfortably below the biological monitoring guidance value. This is giving us extra reassurance, because we're not only looking at exposure by the inhalation route, but we're looking at the body burden from potentially skin absorption or ingestion for the case of poor hygiene. So this can be considered an advantage. Is it a big deal that we haven't been able to do air sampling, or we choose to do a biological monitoring sampling instead? Well, not really, because the Koch APCOT gives us this paragraph 203 that said we don't need to do exposure monitoring if the employer is able to demonstrate that you've got an alternative method of evaluation. So this is something that is well worth considering given all the disadvantages that we just talked about from monitoring on the aerosol fraction. So wouldn't it be good, this is to help us assess our data, wouldn't it be useful if we could actually have exposure results that have been obtained by peer groups carrying out a similar type of work? This information is something that may soon be available, resulting from the Isocyanate database, which we're going to be talking about later in this webinar. So what I'll do is I'll leave the question about how useful this will be. I'll leave that hanging in the air like an unextracted isocyanate aerosol and pass you over to Chris, who will do a further explanation of what is in the pipeline. So thank you very much, everyone. That ends my section of the webinar, and I'll pass you now over to Chris.
Thank you very much, Graham. Okay, so just bear with me for a few seconds while I share my screen. Is that sharing, Graham? Can you give me a thumbs up if that's sharing? You're the only person I can see. Is my screen sharing?
Yeah, you're sharing, you're good.
I am sharing. Thanks, Lee. Thanks, Lee. Okay, then. So following on from what Graham's just talked about, so this links together a couple of things. This links together the stuff that Graham just talked about on isocyanate monitoring and the GAL, and it links together a topic that I've spoken about on a couple of occasions at different BOHS events, most recently last week at the conference in Newcastle. And this is about data sharing, maximising the value in the occupational hygiene data that we collect as a profession. Okay. So I'm going to start with this slide here. So this is an extract from HSE's annual health statistics. Okay, so HSE publish annual stats every year. I'm sure most people take a look at them when they publish. These are the asthma stats, and what this tells us is that isocyanates are the leading cause of occupational asthma in the UK, and they are by a long way, and they have been for a sustained period of time. Okay, so whatever's happening out there with isocyanates and all the good work that our members do to support industry to manage the risk, we're still not having as much impact as perhaps we would like to have. We'd love to see the isocyanate stats coming down and isocyanates not to be leading this top of the pops at the moment, this very unfortunate top of the pops. Okay, but one of the problems with these stats, as I think people will recognise, is that this is a lagging indicator of risk. These are real cases of occupational asthma that have been identified by medics. So these are real people that have already had excess exposure and have been harmed by isocyanate exposure in the workplace. Wouldn't it be good if we had a situation where, as well as the lagging indicators, which are useful, we also had a set of leading indicators that allowed us to do something in advance of people being made ill? If I was in the room in a general face-to-face session, I'd do a quick straw poll now and ask the audience how many people would prefer leading indicators over lagging indicators. I can't do that on a webinar, but my suspicion is that most of us as occupational hygienists dealing in prevention would prefer a set of leading indicators over lagging indicators. This is something that we're working on a number of substances at the moment, and I spoke last week at the conference about the work that we're doing on respirable crystalline silica. This morning I'm talking about isocyanates. Okay, we're in a unique situation with isocyanates through the GAL that Graham's just explained very well, insofar as BOHS have a direct route of communication with every single hygienist in the country that's conducting isocyanate exposure monitoring. Okay, within that exposure monitoring, there are a number of things that we could extract as being leading indicators of health risk for isocyanates. The main ones that I'm going to talk about this morning are the actual exposure monitoring results, the quantitative results that you get back from the lab, from your air sampling, but also the control intelligence that you gather when you go out to a client's site and you conduct an isocyanate exposure survey, as well as the measurement. You're going to gather this important information on control, what controls are in place and how effective those controls are. Both of these would form part of a set of leading indicators for the risks associated with isocyanates. Okay. Whilst you're doing that monitoring for your individual clients, and no doubt that's providing a great deal of value to your individual clients, at the moment we're not doing anything at a national level to link all this data together and to leverage the extra value that exists within all of this exposure monitoring data that our members are generating. Okay. Wouldn't it be good if we could do something to change this, to improve this situation? Wouldn't it be good if BOHS could start generating leading indicators of health risk? I think they'd serve a number of purposes, these things. I think, importantly, they would raise our profile. They'd raise the profile of the occupational hygiene profession. We've got various sources of lagging indicators for health risk. We don't seem to have anything like as many sources of leading indicators in the UK. Wouldn't it be good if BOHS could step in and start to fill that gap? Because undoubtedly this would also benefit, which is our main mission. It's on the bottom of every slide I'm presenting today. This would undoubtedly benefit worker health protection because it would increase our collective understanding on exposures, on exposure trends, and importantly on what's happening in terms of control and what works most efficiently in terms of controlling isocyanate exposures. So we are proposing to conduct a research project with the GAL users, the people that measure isocyanates using the GAL license. Okay. The objective of what we're proposing to do is to collate and analyse isocyanate exposure and associated control data to allow the creation of these leading indicators of health risk. Okay. And the way that we're going to do that in a very simplified version is that we're going to talk to all the members that are conducting isocyanate monitoring, all the GAL users. We're going to get a researcher to conduct a structured telephone interview with you to try to pull together, to collate all of this incredibly valuable data and intelligence. Okay. So this is a research project. BOHS are a scientific charity. We've been around a long time as a scientific charity. And I think it's fair to say that in the past, BOHS have dabbled in various bits of research, but it's not been a main activity within BOHS. So we realised while we were pulling all this together that we had no real governance procedures to make sure that the work was being done properly. So we have already agreed a BOHS research governance framework, and that's been signed off and approved by both faculty committees. That's already been done. We have a research governance committee, which contains representatives from both faculties, from head office, and also an external independent member. Okay, this ensures the scientific quality, not just of this project, but of any other research project that BOHS get involved in. And it also ensures that ethical issues are adequately considered, and it creates accountability for all the research that BOHS intends to get involved with, back to the BOHS board, whose duty it is to manage the risks to the society. Going down to the nuts and bolts of what we're going to do. So I've already said there's going to be a structured telephone interview with all GAL users, or all GAL users that are willing to participate in this research project. Okay. To make sure that we collect data in the most useful way, we need to collect it in a systematic and consistent format. So we've developed a data framework which allows us to collect the data in that way. That allows us to record the monitoring data and all the associated contextual information that we need to interpret that data. So we'll be asking questions about which industry did the data come from, what was the job, what was the process, what was the physical form, the chemical form of the isocyanate, the monitoring method used, was it an impinger, was it a filter, or was it an impinger filter combo, and also about the exposure controls that were in place at the time of the monitoring. And the data from my own organisation, so I work for HSE, I work in the science division of HSE, the data that we hold on isocyanate exposures is already being uploaded into this data framework in an anonymous format. You can't trace where any of these samples have been taken, but HSE's data will form part of this database and this research. I think one of the big things that consultants will worry about in all of this is client confidentiality. Are we allowed to share this data? Do we own this data? You know, there are always going to be these client confidentiality questions. Okay, so just to to make a few important points here. First of all, we're not asking for any sensitive personal data. We certainly don't want to know the names of the workers that were sampled, and we don't need to know, and we don't want to know, the actual names of the individual clients that the monitoring was done for. It's enough for us to know which industry it came from and what the process was at the time of the monitoring. We don't need to know the actual name of the company that the data came from. That's of no value, and we don't want that. We won't be asking for that. Okay. We've taken advice from a legal professional insofar as we've spoken to Kevin Bampton about this, and Kevin's given us the advice that's up on the slide, that the sharing of exposure monitoring results for the purposes of further analysis, quality assurance, verification and improvement of a service is not normally a breach of commercial confidentiality, where the client, the site and the employees are not identifiable, which is the case in what we're doing. Okay. However, commercial confidentiality to some extent will depend on the individual contract between the consultant and the client. So I think it's wise that any consultant that gets involved in this project does check those contractual arrangements before entering into sharing data with us for the research project. If you look on the BOHS website, there's a link on that slide there. There are various model letters and data sharing agreements that can be used to inform the consultant's conversation with their clients when they're asking for permission to share this data, or when they're discussing with them the fact that they intend to share this data, I think, which is a more accurate way of putting it. Okay. What's in it for our members? Why should they get involved in this? Because this is a voluntary thing. We can't compel members to join this research project. It's not a condition of the GAL. Okay. Well, first of all, you're getting involved in research. So that's CPD. You'll get CPD points for getting involved in research. And I suspect that opportunities to get involved in research might be a little bit thin on the ground for some people that are working in consultancy. So that should tick a box for you, hopefully. Okay. We'll be able to provide feedback. We'll be able to provide feedback to the member sharing the data. It'll be confidential feedback. It won't be shared any wider than between the research team and the actual member sharing the data, which will allow you to benchmark the data that you're collecting against, as Graham said, against your peer group, other people that are monitoring isocyanates within the UK. Okay, and as I've already said, I think to me, the biggest benefit to all of us as occupational hygiene professionals is that it's going to raise the profile of what we do. We're going to be generating very useful data, very useful statistics that's going to give occupational hygiene an even higher profile than it's already got. In terms of the project timescales, so we've already got our data framework agreed. As I've said, we're already populating that. People in my team in HSE are already populating that with the data that we hold. And we've got our research governance framework in place, as I said a few slides ago. Okay, so the plan is we're going to start conducting the interviews in the autumn this year. We're going to start with a couple of pilots, and we've got a consultancy lined up who's going to work with us on a pilot to make sure that the telephone survey actually works and allows us to collect the information that we need. Okay, assuming that pilot's a success, or at least allows us to iron out any minor wrinkles in the system, we intend to conduct the main data collection phase in Q3, Q4, so the back end of this current calendar year, autumn, winter of this current calendar year. We have a research student at one of the universities contracted to work with us on this, and this person will be conducting an analysis of all this data in Q1, Q2 of 2026. And ultimately, we aim to publish this in a peer-reviewed scientific journal, most likely our own publication, the Annals of Work Exposures and Health, next autumn 2026. So they are the timescales for what we're intending to do. I think that's all I need to say about this morning. I'm happy to answer any questions, but I think that's the end of my presentation. So I'll stop sharing my screen. Thanks for listening.
Many thanks to both Graham and Chris. An excellent, very clear presentation from both of you. So we're now into the Q&A session. So if you wish to ask a question, please put your hand up, because I would prefer that you ask your question audibly rather than me mangling it by reading it off the chat. So let's start with Darren. Darren Story, are you willing to ask your question in person? Excellent. Go ahead.
Yeah, that's no problem. Sorry. basically, it was just to Graham. You said about the shelf life of the solutions. I'm assuming that's primarily the impinger solution, but does that actually relate to the stabilizing solution? We get sort of 3 mils in each jar for the filters. Graham, you're on mute.
We did so well not having technical difficulties during his presentation. Never mind.
My apologies, I'm really sorry about that. But the answer is yes. The solution that you use for stabilising the impregnated filters is essentially the same as you would use in the impingers. So yes, that you would be looking to get your impregnated filters together with the stabilising solution as close as you can get to when you do the actual survey, and within that 1 week, ideally.
Yeah, that was what I was assuming, but I just wanted to clarify. Thank you.
No problem.
Any more questions? While you're thinking, can I? Oh, that's all right. Josh, please go ahead.
Yeah, just on the shelf life of the stabilizing solution, just what happens when you send them back to the lab? Because we've been having some quite long turnaround times from our samples at the lab. Do they put them in fresh stabilizing solution, or do they put them in some sort of suspended state before they get analyzed? Just I don't know if you can answer that, Graham, but yeah, cheers.
Do you want to take that one, Kate? Do you know what happens when they actually get back to the lab?
So I don't. It's not my speciality, but samples would generally be refrigerated or frozen to preserve the stability during the analysis stage. So once it's with the laboratory, they should ensure that it's stable for the entire process of analysing the samples.
Okay, thanks.
Gaffel.
Sorry, my question might be a bit specific to myself, but the group license excludes Northern Ireland. So I'm just wondering for the database, and not just Northern Ireland, but just a lot of occupational hygienists would use biological monitoring. Would biological monitoring be included in the database? Or is there any, basically, yeah, will it be included in the database going forward, or?
Chris, you going to take that?
Well, I'll take it the best I can. The short answer is so the database has a field to include biological monitoring results, and certainly where we have parallel biological monitoring results with air samples within our HSE data set, we are entering our biological monitoring data into the database. I cannot remember if we decided whether we were going to actually ask members to share their BM data or not. I'm not sure if we've bottom that one out. Can you remember, Kay? I'm sorry.
No, I can't remember.
We have the capability to do it. We've got a field in the database. Obviously, we're starting to stretch things a bit because biological monitoring is not covered by the group authority license at all. I suspect from a scientific perspective, it would be more useful to collect the biological monitoring data as well. But I think we just need to assure ourselves that we're still operating within our research ethics framework.
Thank you.
Thanks, Chris. Okay, so I'm just going to ask if there are no actual other questions at the moment. I'm going to ask you to use the raise hand feature so we can do a few polls here. So if you're on the call and you currently have done something under the GAL license in the last year or two, please raise your hand. Let's see how many GAL users we have online. Okay, take your hands down. So that's about 16 people. And of those 16 people, who would be willing to participate in that research project that Chris has just outlined?
Keep going.
Yeah. Come on, press them buttons, press them buttons.
Higher.
Fabulous. Right, so thank you very much. You can take your hands down. So that would seem to be about 3/4 of you at least who are willing to participate. So Graham can do the sums and work out what 3/4 of the entire GAL list is, but hopefully that's a good enough number. Does anybody have any specific concerns about participating that they'd like to share with the group? So if you don't think you would apply, why is that? Is it time? Is it the confidentiality thing? Anybody got anything to say on that? So Jessica, please. Or is that a legacy hand?
Is there Jessica or Jennifer?
I'm asking Jessica first because she had her hand up first, but
Okay.
it might be a legacy hand, so I'm not sure.
Sorry, I'm not the best with using Teams still.
Oh,
Yeah, it's just left
that's-
over. Sorry, love.
That's fine. Okay, so Jessica, I believe, has a question, so we'll go to Jessica. Thank you.
I'll ask. International doesn't apply for this group. Is that correct? International results.
Yep. This is correct. So the GAL only covers users in Great Britain.
Thank you.
Amar.
So obviously we've got the GAL and monitoring using solution with filter impregnated with the MPP solution. Are there any other methods for us to look at isocyanate exposure from an air monitoring perspective?
Graham, do you want that or shall I take that? You're on mute again, Graham.
Yeah, okay. There are other methods, but as I pointed out in the presentation, they do have the disadvantage in that they're not recognised to monitor TRIG, which is the total reactive isocyanate group. The things such as the acid sample, I know you've done a lot of work with that, Kate, you might want to follow up on that, but if you do use methods other than MDHS 25.4, there is potential for you to not be monitoring some isocyanate that is present because the method does not extend to picking that up. And you've always got to be aware of that and know what isocyanates you actually likely to encounter in that work and to check that the method does pick that up. So I don't know if you want to add anything to that, Kate?
So yeah, there are other trig methods available. So there are NIOSH methods and such like, but they also have their disadvantages. So they're not restricted in terms of the license, perhaps, but some of them are still because they use a different piperazine and they're all covered under the same rules. And they're much less used in the UK, so there's less experience of them. So you can go to other trig methods, but there are no real advantages to doing that because they all have the same complications in terms of sampling and analysis. And as Graham's pointed out, HSE recently published a report in the last year or so where we did look at the asset sampler as well, because we recognise that the commercial world is carrying on regardless of what MDHS 25 says. It can be used in certain circumstances. You do need to characterize your exposures because you have to have samples standards for all of those characterized isocyanates. And it doesn't make the actual analysis any easier. So although the sampling for the hygienist is much more straightforward, the analysis is no more straightforward for the laboratories, and so not all laboratories will be able to offer it. And it doesn't comply with the workplace exposure limit. So if you want to do compliance with a well, you have to use a trig method. If you want to do interim monitoring or testing out a new approach or a new control measure or something like that, then yes, you can use the asset sampler, but you can't use it to show compliance with the well. Okay, so Amar, yes, please. Is that still the same hand?
Yeah. Sorry, no, it's a follow-up question. So
That's fine.
in terms of biological monitoring, would it be okay for us to just do biological monitoring without any air monitoring, given the fact that wearing the samplers, you need to have the statics with and without an impinger, and also a filter only method on the person wearing it, and also looking at, say, sprayers, paint sprayers in booths. It's very difficult to get the equipment on these guys. So biological monitoring for me seems like a very a very useful way of assessing exposure.
Yes, certainly. And if you look at HSE's website for paint sprayers in car body repair shops, it actually recommends biological monitoring as the primary method of assessment. So HSE are fully on board with using biological monitoring where it's appropriate to do so. So that is absolutely fine. And obviously, where it's appropriate to do so is things like people working in booths. You know that booth is full of isocyanate. There's no point measuring whether there's isocyanate in that booth. You know it's there. What you want to know is whether their RPE is working and protecting that worker, and whether they are following procedures in a way to keep them safe. And biological monitoring is the best way to do that. If you have other processes where there may be, you want to check on efficiency of LEV and things like that, or other process controls, then air monitoring may be useful, but you may not have to comply with the well to do that. You just want to make an assessment as to whether the processes are working as you see fit, and so therefore you could use other methods that might be more amenable, such as the asset sampler. Okay. Mary.
Hello. So curious question. Let's say I'm doing MDHS 25 like to the T, but I'm requesting the filter size as the 13 mil instead of the 25 mil, because then I could put it in a Swinex under the air-fed BA. What sort of issues would that cause? Is that allowed? I've never attempted it before myself, but I've always been kind of curious if I could go that route.
Do you want me to have a go at that, Kate?
Please.
I think to the letter of the law, then you're not following the method. You're not using the sampling device that's specified in the method. So you're using an unvalidated method. So, but I also believe, Mary, that may well provide you with some useful information. But I don't think you could say that you are following a validated method if you're not using the sampling approach that's described in the method. So you couldn't compare the results with the well. If that's the absolute purpose of the sampling, is to know whether you're above or below the well, I think you have to follow the validated method and use the sampling approach that's described in the method. Unless the Swinex 30 mil Swinex method head is part of MDHS 25.4, and I don't think it is, then you're not following MDHS 25.4 to the letter.
Gotcha. That makes sense. I think it's, it could be helpful just to see, is anything coming into the breathing apparatus? Are they lifting their masks too soon? But for well compliance, no.
I agree entirely. Very useful and a very, a great thing to do. Yeah, but you're not following the method, so you can't use the results to directly compare and assess compliance with the well.
Yeah. Thank you.
Okay.
Okay, I'll have a final call for any final questions. And while you're thinking whether you have a final question, can I just say thank you again to Graham and Chris. That was great. Everybody who is in the GAL system, please look out for your invitation to take part in this research, and please look upon it in a positive and mindful light and go, I will do my bit. I will be altruistic. We're all part of trying to make something better here. So hopefully you will see the benefit of that and will take part. So I'm seeing no further hands. So in that case, I will close the webinar now. Thank you all for joining. As I said, I'm sure there will be further BOHS webinars in future. Keep an eye out for them, and keep an eye out for your invitation to the research. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Kate. Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Thanks.